Meena Shailesh Kumar, Senior Analyst, Asia Eurasia Group, Rudra Kumar Pandey, Partner at Shardul Ramarchand Mangaldas. He heads the Japan desk at the firm, and Ramupendra Das, head at the Center for Regional Trade at the Department of Commerce. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here. Shailesh, let me start by asking you, you put out an interesting note on what your key expectations are from the Modi-Abe visit, and you say that this is going to be a made-for-the-cameras visit, and we've seen perhaps a little bit of that play out already with that 8-kilometer roadshow and the bear hug that we saw early this morning and through the day. But in terms of the Chinese angle, because you also go on to say that China is going to loom large in the discussions between Prime Minister Modi and Shinzo Abe. How critical is that going to be?
So I think there is a very big geopolitical aspect to this. I mean, we're obviously coming off the Doklam issue just a couple of weeks ago. India needs to show that there are alternatives to combating Chinese influence in the region. So, one of the arguments we've put forward is that the bullet train is more than just an infrastructure project. It is, there's a domestic argument, which is that Modi needs to show the constituency that he's delivering on his promise of infrastructure development. He campaigned on a bullet train in part. Second part of it is that by showing the, very generous loans that India received, that there's an alternative format of financing that's the opposite of what China tends to do. And then the third aspect of it is that, India could have gone with China. They could have bought Chinese bullet trains, but they didn't. They went with Japan instead. So they're clearly trying to send a signal. I think China is the unsaid third party in the room. A lot of the showmanship that's taking place was expected. And they want to send a signal out to the rest of the world that India and Japan can work together very closely on infrastructure and on security, predominantly to, stop China's influence in the region.
Okay. Let me go across now to Ramupendra Das, head of the Center for Regional Trade at the Department of Commerce. Ram, let's talk about the economic importance of this latest visit between Prime Minister Modi and Shinzo Abe. Of course, tomorrow is going to be the big one with the Shinkansen grounding ceremony. And this is mutually beneficial. From an India perspective, we do hope that there will be a big Make in India component to this large infrastructure project. And as far as Japan is concerned, for Shinzo Abe, this is a big win in terms of being able to spread Japanese infrastructure outside of the country. What would the key expectations be from this particular project? The expectation, for instance, is that what Japan did to India's auto ancillary business, perhaps we could see a little bit of that kind of ecosystem being created on account of the Shinkansen project as well.
Well, yeah, exactly, Shireen. This is something which we have to see it in a larger perspective. And in my view, I would not read too much into the political signaling of this, because China-Japan relations are multiples of what India-Japan economic relations are at the moment, whether it is trade or foreign direct investment.
Yeah.
What I see in this relationship is that there is an inflection point. If you see historically, India-Japan relations, economic relations particularly, were overweighted by the official development assistance. Even today, the official development assistance from Japan is occupying the largest share of the economic relations between India and Japan. Now, in the last few years, after we actually signed the CEPA, you would see that trade has started picking, but yes, as it was mentioned, that in recent times the overall trade volume has gone down, which has its own reasons, because Japanese economy has not been growing, and not that we have been growing at 9%, and especially the manufacturing sector, it has been sluggish. So because our imports are a function of our growth, and our exports are a function of their growth.
Right.
Therefore, the bilateral trade has actually languished. In terms of FDI also, I see that there is a consistency in the last few years. But then still, if you see the proportion of our bilateral economic relations, it is, I would say, it outweighs, the ODA outweighs the other forms of relations. And therefore, the conscious attempts to actually forge the bilaterals and then, blow it up in the context of Asia-Africa growth corridor, that is something which I think is going to lay a greater economic foundation, which will be perhaps on the basis of commercial interactions more, than development assistance.
Okay, that's an important point that you make, that so far the economic bent has really been ODI-led. But Rudra, let me put that question to you. And it's interesting because, you know, the Asia-Africa corridor that we just talked about, that's something that Shailesh has written about as well, that this could be a counter to the Belt Road Initiative, where Japan is putting down $30 billion. India is expected to put down total investment of about $40 billion. But outside of the infrastructure aspect of the economic relationship, you know, where else would you put your money, and what would the key expectations be from this particular visit? Defense cooperation, nuclear cooperation, what would your key headlines be?
So I think on the strategic side, apart from the nuclear cooperation, also the high-speed railway, they are going to you know, put a foundation stone for the launch of the Maruti Suzuki factory, and also the Suzuki Denso Toshiba joint venture for lithium battery they're going to manufacture lithium battery in Gujarat. So that will be a two major again landmark you know,
events,
inauguration by the Abe-san and Modi-san. And apart from that, there are several MOUs being proposed. You know, what we understand is from the Digital India front to Skill India front, and also other defense corporations. You know, so there are multiple which will come to know tomorrow. There is a meeting lined up with the business delegates in the morning, which they hold every year, IJBLF. So those announcements will be made, but we see, you know, that the relations between Japan and India has been growing. I agree with you, the trade has declined. And just to encourage more trade from India's side, the Japan and India, they are negotiating some multiple agreements, in particular for organic products, in the pharmaceuticals. So we will be seeing some growth definitely of export from India. That has a large, you know, where India has a potential. So apart from the strategic, yes, trade side will also improve. Apart from that, on the investment side, when your colleague mentioned about the data, just to tell you that from 16-17, about $4.7 billion investment was made. In April to June already is $4.5 billion. And we know that there are several strategic, you know, investment decisions are being made, and we are hoping that the investment will grow to the maximum of probably $8 billion this year.
Okay, so you're hopeful of the investments continuing to grow, and that's the trajectory that Rituparna was also pointing out, where we have seen an uptick on the investment number. But Shailesh, coming back to you for your wrap-up comments, and we'll check in with you tomorrow once we hear more announcements coming in from both sides. You know, on defense cooperation as well as nuclear cooperation, what is it that you would realistically expect?
So I think there's already a movement, for example, on the naval side. You know, U.S., India, and Japan have the Malabar Hill exercise that already go on. India is now signaling that they're interested in potentially buying Japanese submarines and maybe even Japanese aircraft. Historically, this has been a little bit of a difficult area because Japan has not been very successful in exporting much of its defense equipment. But I think there's a natural cooperation between the two. They've openly talked about the need for joint naval exercises or even joint cooperation on anti-piracy. This is one of the few burgeoning areas. You know, India and Japan have a natural need to get together on this front. There's a few other countries like Vietnam that fits into this. Quick comment on the Asia-Africa corridor, though, like you mentioned, or you know, what we were saying is that this is in response to Belt Road Initiative. You know, India wants to get a foothold into Africa. This is one of the first places that China ventured out into. It's a huge commodity base, obviously. India needs commodities. But there's a lot of signaling going on. And yes, the economics are important with India, Japan, but we cannot forget about the geopolitics. Modi wants to be close to Japan for a host of reasons, similar to why Modi wants to be close to the U.S. There's a big signaling effect that goes on. When you're friends with Japan and the U.S., there's other similar countries that come into the fold that need to then be friends with India as well, like Australia, South Korea, Israel, and so forth.
Okay. All right. So look at the geopolitics of it and not just the economics of what we can expect from this visit. Ram, Shailesh, and Rudra, thanks very much for joining us today. We will check in with you tomorrow, as I pointed out, when we do have more details on the takeaways from this 11th visit between Prime Minister Modi and Shinzo Abe. But